communication within a team. So rather than having a team of 12, you have a team of 4 or 6. So that's smaller. You get really high bandwidth within that team. And then the way that you can deal with having more teams is having clearer boundaries between those teams, right? So simply by drawing, it's this good abstraction in the same way as we build software, right? If you can define the team boundaries in a way that the vast majority of a team's work is within that boundary, and a minority of the team's work crosses those team boundaries, that's another way of getting at that problem. Does it make sense what I'm suggesting? That's a big design upfront model. The assertion, and I agree with it actually, is that we will learn and probably reform the partitions over time. Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. What does a leader do? That's what we do, is figure out what those team boundaries are and learn over time how to reformulate them. Refactoring the organization is absolutely part of that, no argument. And that's actually maybe one of the hardest parts. You do not have to, I assert you don't have to do big design up front. You do have to be agile about it. You take your best guess, 80-20 rule of what are the individual domains that make sense for our organization, and then as you go along, you learn. What we do in Stitch Fix, and let me just say one more thing. If you parallel it to parts of the business, that's more stable. It's more stable than it would otherwise be. So the example I was giving from Stitch Fix is that I have a team that builds merchandising software. That merchandising team is going to exist a long time because we're always going to be buying clothes. We're always going to, at least in our model, we're always going to have stylists. So we always have a team that's going to build that. We're always going to have warehouses, et cetera. So what I have done in our teams over time, and we've actually quadrupled in the last year and a half since I've been at Stitch Fix, from 25 engineers to 100. And what we have done is less of refactoring the team boundaries and more growing through mitosis, if that makes any sense. So when I arrived, we had one merchandising team. Now we have we had one merchandising team. Now we have 2, for subdivisions for individual, subparts of the actual business, buying on one side, planning on the other, if anybody does retail. For the warehouse software, we used to have 1 team. Now we have 3 because we've subdivided inside the warehouse versus the shipping optimization versus another thing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, and is it possible that one could draw those domain boundaries incorrectly? Yeah, totally. And then you just learn from it, right? Yes, sir.
Regarding the long-term teams, I was reading this article recently about Silicon Valley taking a page out of Hollywood and basically organizing teams for a purpose, right? Just like as a movie. And I've seen that play as a virtual teams where we basically have an experiment, spin up a team, run with that team, and then dismantle it, and the team goes back to their sort of where they belong.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that for running virtual teams?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. Everything's a trade-off. So there's no one right organization. As I like to say, every organization is broken. It's just how broken is it, right? And why is it? I'm going to answer your question, but I can't help philosophizing for one moment. Every organization is broken. Why? Because the organization is a multidimensional problem, and the hierarchy is a single dimensional slice through that multidimensional problem, right? So by definition, every organization is broken because you don't capture all the interrelationships by that single dimensional planar slice. Okay, off the soapbox. I was a math major in case you can't tell. So yeah, what do I think about forming and reforming teams? I think it honestly depends on the problems you're trying to solve, because for movies, there is no long-term, for movies in particular, there is no long-term thing. There is the people that build the Blade Runner reboot, and then they disband and they do another movie. And so a model that forms an organization, literally a studio, right? A studio around a particular movie release and then disbands, that is very natural to that model. I used to work in gaming briefly. I'm not a gamer myself, but I worked as a CTO of a gaming company, and the gaming industry has that similar model. They actually call them studios. People who lead them are called producers. So it very much mirrors a Hollywood model. And you'll kind of form a team around a particular game and then disband and reform it. For most things, for the things that we did at Google and at eBay and at Stitch Fix, there's much more stability to the things that we build. So I don't find that project-oriented stuff working well. But I think it really is dependent on your business, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So I'm not going to the conclusion about this slide, and I hope it will take long. But some people think roadmap work is glorious work, so all teams do something glorious. And many people think maintenance work is that work. And the consequence of that is that all teams do glorious work and all teams do that work. So there is no obvious caste system among teams.
Right, so just to beautifully stated, and I won't get it as well as you said it, but there is no caste system among teams, no hierarchy among teams, because all teams do wonderful roadmap work, glorious roadmap work, and all teams also do maintenance and scut work, to use your terminology. Yeah, I think that's great for retention. Also, honestly, it's great for discipline. And what do I mean by discipline in this context? If I have to maintain a thing or I have to operate a thing, this is DevOps, right? I'm gonna pay a lot more attention when I am the one that's carrying the pager and I will be woken up at 3 in the morning, / I am the one who's gonna have to maintain it 3 months from now, 3 years from now, hopefully 3 decades from now, but who knows? Yeah, I think that puts the incentives in the right place. Like, I as developer am strongly incented to make this a good piece of software, because if I don't, it still comes back to me. And I think the moral hazard, and I use that term very advisedly, the moral hazard of I can make my bad software practices somebody else's problem is really toxic. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You said that team boundaries are defined by the leaders. How about team membership? Do the teams pick their own members? Are they self-managed or not?
That's a great question. So I haven't really done that well, let's say it this way. Obviously, we're all at-will employees in California. No, but I am going to answer your question, and I'm not at all making fun, by the way. But I want to just it's a more nuanced question. So the question was, what about team membership? Do leaders choose who's on the team, or is it self-organized? So New Relic, which is a software vendor, they actually do have people form their own teams, and there's no choosing of people. That to me it works great for them. I've never tried it. It sounds really radical, but kind of cool. But where I've worked, I think it's the team, the leadership is responsible for figuring out what those boundaries of work are and sort of what's the right level of resource to apply to those things, right? Those are strategic questions. Those are that's what the no-hair people like me, that's what we get paid to do. I do not believe that people should be chained to their desk, and you're not suggesting otherwise. So, people should be able to, within reason, people should try to find teams that they're happy on. But the reality is that the business is an actual business, and sometimes I have to ask people, hey, could you please work on this team that you don't want to be on. It's actually been a while since I've had that problem, to be honest, because there are lots of fun things to do at Google and at Stitch Fix. So for the most part, that's not a problem. But I strongly believe that's the reason why I say team and not people. I don't think a person should need to be chained to a domain for their whole adult life. But I do think that as long as that domain matters to the business, there should be a team that has a long-term life that's associated with that. Does it make sense?
Yes. I want to clarify that a little bit further. The thing is, if the teams are self-managed, they can make sure they are cross-functional. They can do everything.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying is, if teams are self-managed, they can make sure they're cross-functional. Yeah. So one of the things I maybe will say, or maybe not, is I do believe that teams should have a lot of autonomy in terms of how they work and what the individual members of the team do. I will help to decide what you guys have as a 5-person area, and here are the goals, like I'd like you to move this metric in this particular way, or you own this particular service or this related set of services, or you own the applications that support this particular team on the business side. But within that team bound, I obviously will make suggestions, but like within that team boundary, they can figure out what's the right way to work and who should do what and so on. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes, sir. How does the cross-team coordination work? Yeah, so one of the things, I would say two parts to that. One part is, let's draw the team boundaries in such a way that the vast majority of the team's work is within that boundary. Not all of it, that's impossible, but the vast majority of it. And but then the other part, like teams interacting with one another, one of the things that I really liked about Google is, there would be teams that would build supporting services, right? So Google builds a bunch of databases and so on. What was great about Google was that I could choose to use that team's service or not. So nobody forced me to move to use a particular service. And what that means about the relationships between the teams is it's kind of more like a vendor-customer relationship than it is top-down, told what to do. And that has the nice property of making sure that if I am a team in service of another team, that I actually really serve them well, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I like there to be that, that discipline. What was that signal? Okay, yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, so I guess we're 45 minutes into the talk. So yeah, let me know when I need to stop. But yeah, I'm about, I think maybe a sixth through, so, but that's okay. This is much, let's just talk about what you want to talk about, and I hope this is valuable, and whatever. I had more slides than I need to, that's fine. Okay, I actually would kind of want to go past this, but one implication of what I just said about team size is that when you are a startup and you have 5 people, it's really easy to be just one team. When you are 100 people, it's really easy to be 20 different teams of 5. What is challenging, and maybe nobody lives in this world, but I used to when I did startups, that 20 to 25 is an actual stable point for companies. There are companies that stay at 20 to 25 for a long time, and that is a really unpleasant place to be from a team perspective. Why? It's because you're too big to be one team, but you're too small to be efficient, long-lived small teams. Anyway, I don't have a solution. Maybe you guys have a solution to that. I don't know what it is, but I just note that that's a problem. Cool. Okay, that was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing, and maybe I wanted to talk about was sort of processes and practices that we do here, sort of in the sort of DevOps world. So the first is test-driven development. So people have heard of this concept, test-driven development, right? So as part of doing a thing, I'm going to write the tests to make sure that that thing works. If you build hardware, you always did like this. Like there was, the idea that software people would not build a testing structure for their software is crazy if you come from hardware, but whatever. I guess every generation / every layer in the stack needs to learn the lessons that were already known by everybody else, decades earlier. So in case you're not convinced, we don't write tests to waste time. We write them to actually go faster, right? So we write the tests up front, so we make an investment up front to write the tests so that when I make any change, I can see that I haven't broken anything and move on. Tests make better code. So it gives me the confidence to maybe be very courageous in refactoring my code. Why? Because I know that the tests are going to catch whether I've broken something or not. And tests also make better systems. So when you're building a large-scale system, having tests in there is super helpful because it allows us to catch bugs earlier in the sort of development cycle and also allows us to sort of fail faster, if that makes sense. Yeah, cool. And to me, it doesn't matter to me personally very strongly whether you write the tests first or you write the test last, but as part of a unit of work, you are not done unless you do your feature, the feature works, but also that you have tests that validate that the feature will continue to work. Yeah?
Yeah, I totally buy into that. I went to some of these DevOps conferences, and a lot of VPs in engineering said they love that too, but a lot of them are in organizations such that they don't want to invest the time in to do the task. Writing tasks, especially automating tasks, are very expensive.
Yeah,
And so they say, that's what we want to do, but we never do it.
Yeah.
So we deal with bugs afterwards.
Yeah, let me just answer that. That's a beautiful segue to the next slide. So I have often heard, I lost my hair through these types of conversations. We don't have time to do it right. So here's what I ask. Do you have time to do it twice? Because that is the question. That is the question, right? So either we're going to do it right for some value of right, not perfect. We're going to do it for some value of right the first time, or we're going to do it again. And I assert that when you are most strapped for resources, maybe perversely, that is the time when you should most do it right the first time, right? Think about it. I only have 3 or 4 people to get my job done. Should I try to have them do 3 or 4 half-done features? And I'm not saying half-done in my head, by the way. I'm saying something else. Rather, I would rather have them do 1 or 2 really good, really solid features. Like, let's do 100% of one thing rather than 50% of 2 things. And that, and that is true. That my users will thank me, right? Because if I pull out my phone and I get, when I get iOS 11 or whatever just came out or is about to come out, like, I am not going to say, thank goodness Apple, you put 57 new features. Said no one. What I will say is, wow, this particular feature or these 2 or 3 particular features actually matter to me. Does it make sense what I'm saying? Like, I don't care that there are 57 features. In fact, no human does. Like, some people care about some people care about the other.